The billionaire saw a father return baby formula. 30 minutes later, she couldn't stop crying. Have you ever watched someone lose everything without hearing them say a single word? Janet Okafor never expected an ordinary trip to the supermarket to change her life. She had negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching. She had built one of the country's fastest-growing companies from the ground up. People called her brilliant, powerful, untouchable, but nothing in her extraordinary life prepared her for what she was about to witness on a quiet Wednesday night. Because in less than 5 minutes, a complete stranger would remind her what real wealth actually looked like. The checkout line was almost empty. A young father stood at the register with only a few groceries: a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a small bag of rice, 1 pack of diapers, and a single can of baby formula. His 4-month-old son slept peacefully against his chest while a little girl, no older than 4, held tightly to his hand. His clothes were clean but faded. His shoes had clearly seen better days. Still, he stood with quiet dignity. The cashier smiled politely. "That'll be $43.18. The father nodded and inserted his debit card. Declined. He frowned and tried again. Declined. A third attempt. The same answer. Silence filled the checkout lane. He slowly looked at the cashier. "I'm sorry." His voice was calm but heavy. "Please return the baby formula." The cashier hesitated. "Sir, are you sure?" He forced a small smile. "My daughter can eat bread tonight." He gently kissed the baby's forehead. "But I'll figure something out for him." Before anyone could speak, the little girl looked up at her father and asked the one question that froze everyone nearby. "Daddy, is Benjamin going to be hungry again?" The father closed his eyes for just a second. That single moment revealed more pain than tears ever could. He opened them again and smiled at his daughter. "No, sweetheart. Daddy always finds a way." But standing only a few feet away, Janet knew he didn't believe his own words. She had spent years reading faces across boardroom tables. She knew exactly what defeat looked like. And this man was trying desperately not to let his children see it. The cashier quietly reached for the formula. Just then, Janet stepped forward. "Don't return it." Everyone turned toward the elegant woman in the navy blazer. She placed her black card on the counter. "I'll pay for everything." The father immediately shook his head. "No, ma'am, I can't accept charity." Janet looked him straight in the eyes. "This isn't charity. It's a child who deserves to eat." For the first time that night, the father didn't know what to say, and neither of them realized that this simple conversation inside a nearly empty supermarket was about to change both of their lives forever. The man who refused to beg. For several seconds, no one spoke. The cashier looked at Janet, then at the father, waiting. The young father took a slow breath. "I appreciate your kindness, but I can't let a stranger pay my bills." Janet didn't move. She simply asked, "Would you refuse water if your child was dying of thirst?" He looked down at Benjamin sleeping peacefully against his chest. His answer never came, because deep inside, he already knew the truth. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival. The little girl gently tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, it's okay. We can share my dinner." Janet felt her heart sink. Children weren't supposed to think like that. Not at 4 years old. The father knelt beside his daughter. "You never have to give up your food for your brother." She smiled innocently. "But families share." Janet quietly looked away. For years she had attended charity galas where millionaires donated money while cameras flashed around them. Yet this little girl, who owned almost nothing, understood generosity better than all of them. The cashier finally broke the silence. "Sir, please let her help. There isn't anything wrong with accepting kindness." The father closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were filled with quiet exhaustion. "All right, but only the baby formula." Janet smiled. "I think your children deserve dinner, too." Before he could argue again, she nodded toward the cashier. "Ring up everything." The scanner beeped one item after another. Bread, milk, rice, eggs, diapers, fresh fruit, nothing expensive, just enough for a small family to breathe for a few days. The total appeared on the screen. Janet tapped her card. Approved. To her, it was less than the cost of lunch after a business meeting. To the father, it felt like someone had handed him another chance. As the cashier packed the groceries, the father finally spoke. "My name is Timothy Carter." "Thank you." Janet smiled warmly. I'm Janet. No last names, no titles, no mention that she owned companies worth hundreds of millions. For that moment, she didn't want to be a billionaire. She just wanted to be another human being. Timothy picked up the bags. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't have to. I've learned something tonight. He looked confused. Janet glanced toward Benjamin. Sometimes, the people with the least teach us the most. Before Timothy could answer, Benjamin suddenly started crying. His tiny cries echoed through the quiet supermarket. Timothy quickly opened the new formula and prepared a bottle with shaking hands. The baby drank immediately. Within seconds, the crying stopped. Relief washed across Timothy's face. He smiled for the first time that night. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real. Janet watched quietly. She had closed billion-dollar deals, won awards, appeared on magazine covers, yet somehow, watching a hungry baby finally fall asleep felt more meaningful than any success she'd ever achieved. She had walked into the supermarket planning to buy groceries. She had no idea. She was actually walking into the beginning of a story that would change her own life forever. The truth waiting outside. The automatic doors slid open. A cool breeze swept through the parking lot. Timothy balanced Benjamin in one arm while carrying the grocery bags with the other. Amara walked beside him, humming happily. For the first time in days, she knew her baby brother wouldn't sleep hungry. Janet watched them walk away. She should have left. She had emails waiting, investors expecting updates, a private dinner she no longer cared about. But something kept her standing there. Then she noticed it. Timothy wasn't walking toward a car. He wasn't even looking for one. He simply headed toward the bus stop across the street, carrying a baby, groceries, and a 4-year-old child. Janet frowned. Without thinking, she caught up to him. Timothy. He turned. You don't have a car? A faint smile crossed his face. I sold it 6 months ago. To pay hospital bills. Janet didn't ask another question. Some answers didn't need explaining. She glanced at the dark sky. Rain clouds were gathering. At least let me drive you home. Timothy immediately shook his head. You've already done enough. I'll manage. Janet smiled gently. I wasn't asking. I was making sure 2 children get home safely. For a moment, Timothy hesitated. He wasn't afraid of Janet. He was afraid of depending on someone, because life had taught him that every favor eventually came with a price. Janet seemed to read his thoughts. I don't want anything from you. No business. No paperwork. No promises. Just let me help tonight. Timothy looked at Amara. She was shivering in the evening breeze. Then he looked at Benjamin. Still asleep. Finally, he nodded. Just this once. A few minutes later, they were inside Janet's SUV. Amara couldn't stop looking around. She had never sat in a car like this before. She touched the soft leather seat with tiny fingers. It's so squishy. Janet laughed. It's supposed to be. Timothy smiled awkwardly. I'm sorry if she's... Don't apologize. Janet interrupted softly. She's acting exactly like a child should. For a second, the car felt strangely warm, almost peaceful. Then Janet asked, So, where do I take you? Timothy was silent. Too silent. Finally, he pointed ahead. Just keep driving. 20 minutes later, the bright city lights disappeared behind them. The roads became narrower. The neighborhoods grew older. Janet slowed the car. This doesn't look right. Timothy quietly replied, It is. A minute later, he pointed toward a dark, unfinished concrete building. You can stop here. Janet stared through the windshield. There was no front door, no lights, no windows, just bare concrete walls standing in silence. Her voice was barely a whisper. This is your home? Timothy didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because at that exact moment, little Amara smiled and innocently said, Welcome to our house, Miss Janet. Janet felt her heart shatter. A house without hope. Janet slowly stepped out of the SUV. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The unfinished building looked abandoned. Broken concrete, exposed steel beams. Plastic sheets hung from the walls to keep out the wind. There wasn't a single light. This... She struggled to find the words. You live here? Timothy lowered his eyes. I never planned to. He picked up the grocery bags and walked inside. Janet followed. The moment she entered, her chest tightened. A thin mattress lay on the cold concrete floor. A small camping stove sat in one corner. A few folded blankets. 3 plastic containers holding everything the family owned. That was it. No television, no refrigerator, no kitchen, no toys, no photographs. Nothing that made it feel like a home. Benjamin suddenly began to cry. Timothy quickly warmed a bottle and gently fed him. The baby smiled almost immediately. Janet couldn't take her eyes off them. Even here, with almost nothing, Timothy's first priority was still his children, not himself. Amara quietly walked toward Janet. "Miss Janet?" Janet knelt beside her. "Yes, sweetheart?" The little girl pointed toward the grocery bags. "Can I put the fruit away?" Janet smiled. "Of course." Amara carefully carried the bananas to a small plastic box. She handled them as if they were something priceless. Janet felt a lump rise in her throat. Children should never have to treasure basic food. Timothy returned after putting Benjamin to sleep. "I'm sorry you had to see this." Janet looked at him in disbelief. "Why are you apologizing?" He gave a tired smile. "Most people leave when they find out where we live. They stop answering my calls. They stop looking me in the eye." Janet remained silent. She had spent years surrounded by people who judged success by expensive suits and luxury cars. Yet the man standing before her had more dignity than many executives she'd met. Just then, a loud voice echoed from outside. "There he is!" Timothy's face changed instantly. His shoulders tensed. Janet turned toward the entrance. A heavy-set man in a stained work jacket marched inside with 2 others behind him. Without even greeting them, he pointed at Timothy. "I gave you until today. Where's my rent?" Timothy took a slow breath. "I just need a little more time." The landlord laughed coldly. "Time? You've been asking for time every week." Then his eyes fell on the grocery bags. "So, you suddenly have money for food, but not for rent?" He kicked one of the bags across the floor. Apples rolled in every direction. Little Amara gasped and ran to pick them up. Janet watched the scene in stunned silence. Then the landlord looked at her expensive clothes. A greedy smile spread across his face. "I get it now. So you finally found someone rich to rescue you." Timothy's jaw tightened. Before he could say a word, Janet stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but powerful. "Pick those apples up." The man laughed. "And who exactly are you?" Janet looked him straight in the eyes. "The woman who's about to make you regret what you just did. The woman they underestimated." The landlord laughed. "You? You think I'm afraid of someone wearing an expensive suit?" Janet didn't answer. She calmly walked over, picked up one of the apples from the dusty floor, and placed it back into the grocery bag. Then she looked at little Amara. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll clean them." The little girl nodded, still holding back tears. Janet slowly stood again. Her eyes met the landlord's. "I asked you to pick them up." He folded his arms. "And if I don't?" Janet reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number. "Hello, Marcus. I need you to look up the ownership records for an unfinished apartment building on Jefferson Street." She paused. "Yes, I'll wait." The landlord's confident smile began to fade. 30 seconds later, Marcus called back. Janet switched the phone to speaker. "The property belongs to East Ridge Development, Ms. Okafor." "Interesting," Janet replied calmly. "And who owns East Ridge Development?" "You do." Silence. The landlord's face turned pale. "What?" Marcus continued. "You purchased the company along with its assets 3 months ago, during the Hamilton acquisition." Janet smiled faintly. "So technically—" She looked directly at the landlord. "You work for me." The man's mouth fell open. I didn't know." "No, you didn't. But you still chose to humiliate a father in front of his children." The 3 workers standing behind him quietly stepped back. None of them wanted to be involved anymore. Janet's voice remained calm. "I've spent years investing in buildings. But today, I've learned some people need rebuilding more than property does." She turned toward Timothy. "How much does he claim you owe?" Timothy hesitated. 2 months' rent. Before he could say the amount, the landlord quickly interrupted. It's all right. We can work something out." Janet looked at him. "Funny. A minute ago, you wanted to throw this family onto the street. Now you want to negotiate? The man couldn't even meet her eyes. Janet took one step closer. I have no problem with collecting rent, but I do have a problem with people who mistake cruelty for authority. She pointed toward the scattered groceries. Pick them up. This time, he didn't argue. One by one, he picked up every apple, every orange, every item he had kicked across the floor. When he finished, he quietly placed the bag in front of Amara. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Amara looked at her father instead of answering. Timothy simply nodded. Thank you. The landlord quickly left with the other two men. The building became silent once again. Timothy looked at Janet in complete disbelief. You own the company? Janet gave a small smile. I honestly forgot. Timothy stared at her. Most wealthy people use their power to make others feel small. She had used hers to protect complete strangers. For the first time, he realized something. The woman who had bought baby formula for his son had just changed far more than one evening. She had given his children something they hadn't felt in a long time. Safety, a secret Timothy had been hiding. After the landlord left, the unfinished building fell silent again. Only Benjamin's soft breathing broke the silence. Timothy looked at Janet. I don't know what to say. Janet smiled gently. Then don't. I didn't come here looking for thanks. She glanced around the cold concrete walls. But I also can't leave two children here. Timothy lowered his eyes. We've survived worse. Janet shook her head. Children shouldn't have to survive. They should be allowed to live. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Janet quietly asked, What really happened? Timothy looked confused. What do you mean? You don't end up here because of one bad month. There has to be more. His shoulders slowly dropped. For months, he had carried the weight alone. Maybe it was finally time to tell someone. My wife, Emily, died 8 months ago. Janet's expression softened. She was diagnosed with an aggressive heart condition. We sold our savings, our car, everything. I even borrowed money. He looked toward Benjamin. I kept believing she'd recover. His voice cracked. But she never came home from the hospital. Silence. Janet felt a lump in her throat. Timothy wasn't a man destroyed by bad decisions. He was a husband who had done everything he could to save the woman he loved. After Emily's funeral, the medical bills kept coming. The warehouse where Timothy worked shut down only weeks later. Without a steady income, everything collapsed. The apartment, the car, his savings. One piece at a time, his old life disappeared. Only his children remained. And that's why, he whispered, I'll never stop fighting. Janet looked at Amara. The little girl had fallen asleep on a folded blanket, still holding the teddy bear Janet had bought. Benjamin slept peacefully beside her. Those children had already lost their mother. She refused to let them lose hope, too. Janet reached into her purse and handed Timothy a small card. This has my private number. Not my office, not my assistant. If you ever need help, call me. Timothy looked at the card. I've spent months believing people only help when they expect something back. Janet smiled sadly. I used to believe the opposite. I thought money could solve every problem. She looked around the unfinished building. Tonight, we've both learned we were wrong. Timothy looked at her for a long moment. Then for the first time since they met, he accepted the card without hesitation. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. A single ray of sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the cracked concrete floor. Janet smiled to herself. Maybe it wasn't just the weather that was changing. Maybe their lives were too. She opened her home, but not everyone was happy. The next morning, Janet returned. This time, she wasn't carrying groceries. She was carrying a decision. She walked inside the unfinished building and looked directly at Timothy. I want you and your children to come home with me. Timothy stared at her. I appreciate everything you've done, but we can't. Janet folded her arms. Why? Because people like me don't belong in places like yours. Janet smiled sadly. Who told you that? Timothy didn't answer. He didn't have to. Life already had. Janet stepped closer. I didn't ask where you came from. I asked if your children deserve a warm bed. Timothy looked toward Amara. She was trying to entertain Benjamin with a broken toy missing one wheel. His heart broke. "Finally," he whispered. "Okay." An hour later, their car stopped in front of Janet's mansion. Amara's eyes grew wide. "Daddy, is this a hotel?" Timothy smiled. "No, I don't think it is." The massive gates slowly opened. As they drove inside, colorful gardens surrounded the driveway. Fountains sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. To Amara, it looked like something from a fairy tale. Inside the mansion, several employees lined up to welcome Janet home. But the moment they noticed Timothy and the children, their smiles disappeared. The house manager, Victoria, stepped forward. "Ms. Okafor," she lowered her voice. "Who are they?" "My guests," Janet answered calmly. Victoria forced a polite smile. "Of course," but her expression told a different story. As Timothy walked past, two employees exchanged nervous glances. Did she really bring strangers here? I've never seen her do that before. Timothy heard every word. He quietly picked up his bags again. Maybe this was a mistake. Janet immediately turned toward him. No, the mistake. She looked directly at the staff. Would be judging someone's worth before knowing their story. The hallway became silent. Nobody spoke another word. That evening, Janet showed the children their rooms. Amara ran from one room to another, laughing. Benjamin giggled from his stroller. For the first time in months, they looked like children instead of survivors. But downstairs, Victoria stood in Janet's office with a worried expression. "I need to say something." Janet looked up from her desk. "Go ahead." Victoria hesitated. "You trust people too easily. What if that man isn't who he claims to be? What if he's only here because of your money?" Janet remained silent. It was a fair question, one she had asked herself the night before. Then she quietly replied, "If I spend my life assuming every struggling person is dangerous, I'll become the very kind of person I never wanted to be." Victoria nodded respectfully. But deep inside, she wasn't convinced, and neither was someone else. Because from the second floor, someone had been listening to the entire conversation. Timothy. And for the first time since arriving, he wondered if accepting Janet's kindness had been the biggest mistake of his life. The missing necklace. 3 days passed peacefully. For the first time in months, Amara laughed without fear. Benjamin slept through the night. Timothy spent his mornings searching for work and his afternoons helping around the mansion. He repaired a broken garden fence, fixed a leaking kitchen faucet, even reorganized the old storage room that had been untouched for years. The staff couldn't deny it. He worked harder than anyone expected, but Victoria still wasn't convinced. She believed Timothy was only waiting for the right opportunity. On the fourth morning, the mansion suddenly erupted in panic. A housekeeper rushed into the hallway. "Ms. Okafor, my grandmother's necklace." "It's gone." The necklace wasn't expensive, but it had been in her family for over 50 years. Within minutes, every employee was searching the house. Drawers were opened. Rooms were checked. Nobody knew where it had disappeared. Then Victoria looked toward Timothy. Her expression changed. When was the last time anyone saw it? The housekeeper thought for a moment. Yesterday, before Timothy repaired the library. The hallway fell silent. Every eye turned toward him. Timothy frowned. "Are you saying I took it?" Victoria crossed her arms. "I'm saying you were the only person working in that room." Amara immediately grabbed her father's hand. "My daddy doesn't steal?" Victoria looked at the little girl. "I'm sure you believe that." Those words cut deeper than she realized. Janet walked into the room. "What's going on?" Victoria explained everything, then added quietly, "I think we should search his bags." The room became silent. Timothy slowly placed his toolbox on the floor. "If that's what you need to do, go ahead." His voice was calm, but the disappointment in his eyes was impossible to hide. Janet looked at him, then at Victoria. Finally, she said something no one expected. "No." Victoria looked shocked. "What if he took it?" Janet answered without raising her voice. "If I have to search an honest man before I have proof, then I never truly trusted him." The room fell completely silent. Timothy couldn't believe what he had just heard. Someone, finally, had chosen to believe him first, not accuse him first. But Victoria wasn't ready to let it go. She looked Janet straight in the eyes. "And what if you're wrong?" Janet took a slow breath. "Then I'll accept the consequences. But until I see evidence, no one in this house will treat Timothy like a criminal. Timothy lowered his head, not because he was guilty, but because no one had defended him like that since his wife was alive. Just then, a voice came from upstairs. "Wait, I think I found something." Everyone looked toward the staircase. The truth no one expected. Everyone turned toward the staircase. An elderly housekeeper hurried down, holding something in her hand. "I'm so sorry. I found it." She opened her palm. The missing necklace. It was caught inside the curtain while I was cleaning the library. Silence. Victoria's face turned pale. She slowly looked at Timothy. "I'm sorry." Timothy didn't answer. He simply picked up his toolbox. "I understand." "No," Victoria whispered. "You don't. I judged you before I knew you." For the first time, she looked genuinely ashamed. Janet gently took the necklace and handed it back to the housekeeper. Then she looked at everyone in the room. "I want all of you to remember something. It's easy to trust someone who has money. The real test is trusting someone who has nothing, except their character." No one said a word, because they all knew she was right. That evening, Timothy quietly packed his bags. Janet walked into the guest room. "What are you doing?" "We're leaving." Janet frowned. "Why?" "I don't want your staff feeling uncomfortable because of us." Janet stepped closer. "So you're going to punish your children for someone else's mistake?" Timothy looked toward Amara, who was peacefully coloring at the table. He couldn't answer. Janet smiled gently. "Stay, not because you need help, but because this is your home until you're ready." At that moment, Amara ran over and hugged Janet. "Please don't let us leave." Janet hugged her tightly. "You aren't going anywhere." Timothy closed his eyes. For the first time since losing his wife, he finally believed those words. Maybe they had found more than a place to stay. Maybe they had found a second chance. The second chance. The following Monday, Janet asked Timothy to meet her at the company's headquarters. As he stepped into the glass building, employees greeted Janet with respect. Only then did Timothy truly realize who she was. She wasn't just wealthy. She was one of the most powerful businesswomen in the city. Janet handed him a folder. "I've been watching you." Timothy looked surprised. "You repair things. You solve problems. And you never complain." She smiled. "I don't want to give you money. I want to give you an opportunity." Timothy slowly opened the folder. It was a full-time position as facilities operations supervisor at one of Janet's commercial properties. A good salary, health insurance, paid leave, and enough income to finally build a future for his children. He looked up in disbelief. "You trust me with this?" Janet smiled. "I trusted you the day you chose your children's dignity over begging. You've earned this." For a moment, Timothy couldn't speak. Then he quietly asked, "What if I disappoint you?" Janet shook her head. "A man who never gave up on his children doesn't give up on his responsibilities." Slowly, a smile appeared on Timothy's face. It was the first smile that wasn't hiding pain. He extended his hand. "I won't let you down." Janet shook it. "I know." Outside the office window, Amara was laughing while Benjamin clapped his tiny hands. For the first time, their future looked brighter than their past. Sometimes family finds you. 6 months later, the unfinished building on Jefferson Street stood empty. Timothy no longer drove past it. Not because he wanted to forget, but because it reminded him how far they had come. He loved his new job. His co-workers respected him. Most importantly, his children finally had stability. Amara had started school. Benjamin had learned to walk. And every evening they all returned to the same place, home. One Sunday afternoon, Janet invited everyone into the garden. A long table was set beneath the trees. Nothing luxurious, just homemade food, children's laughter, and a peaceful afternoon. As Benjamin chased a ball across the grass, Amara ran toward Janet carrying a folded piece of paper. "I made something for you." Janet opened it carefully. It was a drawing. 4 people stood together beneath a bright yellow sun. At the top, in colorful, uneven letters, Amara had written, "The family I prayed for." Janet's hands began to tremble. She looked at Amara. "What does this mean, sweetheart?" The little girl smiled. "The day Mommy went to heaven, I asked God if he could send us someone who would love us again. She wrapped her tiny arms around Janet. I think he sent you. Janet could no longer hold back the tears. She hugged Amara tightly. For years, she had built companies, collected awards, made fortunes, yet nothing had ever filled her heart like that single sentence. Timothy quietly walked over. I used to think the richest person was the one with the biggest bank account. He looked at Janet. I was wrong. The richest person is the one who changes someone else's life. Janet smiled through her tears. No. She glanced at Benjamin laughing in the sunshine, then at Amara holding her hand. You changed mine first. The camera of life seemed to pause on that moment. A billionaire who had everything except love. A father who had lost everything except hope. And 2 children, who unknowingly brought them together. Sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't becoming rich. It's discovering that kindness can create a family where none existed before. And all of it started with 1 can of baby formula that a father was too proud to accept, until one stranger refused to let him walk away.